The banishment grounds were older than memory, a circle of black stones that drank the light and exhaled cold. Snow fell in silent sheets, coating everything in a shroud of white that felt less like winter and more like burial. Aria Thorn knelt at the center of the ancient circle, barefoot on frozen ground that bit through the thin white exile's robe they'd forced her into. Her dark hair clung to her pale face, soaked through from the storm, and her gray eyes stared forward with a kind of hollow shock that came when the world revealed its cruelty all at once. Heavy iron bands encircled her wrists, carved with suppression runes that pulsed with a sickly green light. They burned against her skin, drinking down any trace of power she might possess, though everyone believed there was nothing there to suppress. Spiritless. Defective. Broken. The words had followed her for 22 years, like a second shadow. The pack surrounded her in a perfect circle, hundreds of wolves in their battle forms, eyes gleaming with judgment and something worse, satisfaction. They'd been waiting for this, she realized. Waiting for proof that the healer who couldn't shift, who couldn't manifest even the smallest spirit spark, was exactly the curse they'd always believed her to be. Alpha Commander Theron Ironheart stood before her like a monument to war itself. 6.5 feet of brutal efficiency, wrapped in dark leather armor reinforced with wolf pelt pauldrons and ceremonial war paint that turned his rugged face into something ancient and terrible. His hand rested on the axe at his belt, though he wouldn't need it for this. The banishment required no bloodshed, only the severing of bonds and the crossing of stones. He wouldn't look at her. For years as his fated mate, for years of hiding in shadows, because claiming a spiritless healer would shame his bloodline, and now he couldn't even meet her eyes. Behind him, War Maiden Kasha and Nightshade wept theatrical tears, clutching a blackened talisman that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. She was everything Aria wasn't: powerful, beautiful, her spirit wolf legendary for its ferocity. Her golden hair cascaded over shoulders wrapped in crimson battle silks, and when she spoke, her voice carried the practiced tremor of perfect betrayal. She cursed the air, Kasha choked out, holding the talisman higher. I found this in her healing chambers. Blood magic, forbidden and foul. The child burns with fever because of her jealousy. I didn't. Aria's voice cracked, barely a whisper against the howling wind. She tried again, louder. Theron, please. I am your mate. You know I would never harm the pack. I've healed hundreds. I've given everything. Do not speak my name. His voice was granite, final. The alpha command in it made every wolf in the circle whimper and bow their heads. But Aria felt nothing, no compulsion, no weight. The spiritless were immune to such things, a small mercy that felt like mockery now. Theron's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking beneath the war paint. The evidence is absolute. The talisman bears your blood signature. Elder Morvain confirmed it. He paused, and something flickered across his face, regret, perhaps, or just the wind. Theron Ironheart, Alpha Commander of the Ironwood Pack, sever the mate bond to preserve pack honor. You are cast out, marked as forsaken, sentenced to exile in the wastes where spirits go to die. The pain hit her like a blade of pure ice driving through her sternum. The bond she'd carried for 4 years, the golden thread that had tied her soul to his even when he refused to acknowledge it publicly, snapped. It felt like her veins were filling with frozen shards, her heart stuttering in her chest as something fundamental tore away. Aria doubled over, a strangled sound escaping her throat that wasn't quite a scream. The pack jeered. Someone threw a stone that struck her shoulder. Then another. The warriors grabbed her arms, hauling her upright, and began dragging her toward the boundary stones. Cursed wretch! Let the wastes take her. The spiritless die as they lived, worthless. Each word was another stone, another cut. Aria's feet left bloody prints in the snow as they forced her forward. The boundary stones loomed ahead, ancient and black, covered in runes that glowed faintly red. Beyond them, the wastes stretched endless and white, a frozen hell where temperatures dropped so low that exposed skin froze in minutes. They shoved her forward. Aria stumbled, catching herself at the threshold. She turned back one last time, meeting Theron's eyes across the distance. For just a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw the war raging behind those storm-gray eyes, duty against something deeper he'd never been brave enough to name. Then Kasha pressed herself against his side, and the moment shattered. Aria turned back to the wastes. She took one step forward, then another. The boundary line burned beneath her feet, a threshold older than the pack itself. The iron suppression bands began to vibrate, the runes glowing brighter, brighter. They shattered. The sound was like thunder cracking the world in half. The iron exploded off her wrists in molten fragments, and something inside Aria's chest that had been sleeping for 22 years opened its eyes. Fire erupted from her core, blue-white flames that didn't burn her skin but sang through her bones. The snow around her vaporized instantly, steam rising in great clouds. Her gray eyes blazed gold, and when she screamed, it wasn't in pain. It was in awakening. The Phoenix had remembered who she was, and the pack that had condemned her to darkness was about to learn what it meant to face the dawn. The fire didn't burn. It sang. It remembered. Aria's body convulsed as something ancient and vast unfolded inside her chest, pushing outward with the inevitability of dawn breaking over mountains. Her bones began to reshape, not with the agonizing crack of a normal shift, but with a sound like crystal chimes ringing in harmony. Her spine arched, vertebrae elongating, and from her shoulder blades erupted wings, not flesh and feather, but pure flame, blue-white and incandescent, spreading 20 feet to either side. The transformation rippled through her in waves of liquid fire. Her limbs lengthened, muscles coiling with impossible strength. Her skin seemed to glow from within, pale as moonlight but hot as forge fire. And when her eyes opened fully, they were no longer gray but molten gold, burning with an inner sun that had been waiting 22 years to rise. The pack recoiled as one, their jeers turning to howls of terror. The heat radiating off her was immense, a wall of searing air that turned snow to steam and made the ancient boundary stones crack and weep. Warriors stumbled backward, shielding their faces, their wolf forms unable to withstand the phoenix fire that poured off her in waves. Theron stood frozen, his face gone ashen beneath the war paint. Impossible, he breathed, and for the first time since she'd known him, his voice shook. The Phoenix bloodline died out 500 years ago. The texts, they said. You were wrong. The voice that came from Aria's throat wasn't hers alone. It harmonized with something older, layered with the weight of centuries. She rose to her full height, no longer the small, broken healer they'd condemned. She stood nearly 7 feet tall now, wreathed in blue-white flames that danced across her skin like living silk. Wings of fire spread wide behind her. About so many things. In the crowd, Kasha's theatrical tears had stopped. For just an instant, her beautiful face twisted with something raw and furious, not fear, but rage. The look of someone whose carefully laid plans had just turned to ash. Then fear crashed over her features as Aria's burning gaze found her across the circle. The voice came again, not from Aria's lips, but directly into every mind present, a telepathic declaration that bypassed all shields and resonated in the very bones of those who heard it. I am not Aria the Spiritless. I am Seraphel, first of the Dawn Flames, and I remember everything your kind tried to make me forget. The wastes themselves responded to her awakening. The frozen ground beneath her feet began to thaw, snow melting in an expanding circle that grew wider with each heartbeat. A mile out, then 2, the white landscape transforming to bare earth. Dead trees that had stood like skeletal sentinels for decades suddenly burst into bloom, white flowers unfurling on blackened branches as if spring itself had been commanded to return. The boundary stones, ancient and inviolate, began to glow not with their usual warning red, but with phoenix blue. The runes carved into their surfaces rewrote themselves, ancient script flowing into new patterns that no one present could read, but everyone could feel, a change in the very laws that governed this place. Theron took a step forward, hand outstretched, his alpha composure finally shattering. Aria, wait, we can fix this. The bond, we can. The bond is ash. Seraphel's wings flared wider, flames intensifying until even Theron had to retreat, his armor beginning to smoke. You made your choice, Commander. You chose honor over heart, duty over truth. Now I make mine. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to rain fire down on the pack that had condemned her, to watch them burn for their judgment. Kasha stood there, guilt written in her widened eyes despite her best efforts to hide it. Theron stood broken, reaching for something he'd thrown away. The pack cowered before her, finally seeing what they'd tried to destroy. But Seraphel had been born in fire, and fire knew the difference between destruction and transformation. She turned toward the wastes, toward the endless frozen wilderness that was supposed to be her grave, and she chose the unknown over revenge. With a powerful leap that cracked the earth beneath her, she launched into the sky, wings of flame carrying her higher than any wolf had ever flown. Below, her footprints glowed gold in the snow, scorched marks that would remain for years, reminder of what they'd lost. Behind her, the pack watched in silence as the phoenix flew not back toward them in vengeance, but deeper into the wastes, toward whatever waited in that forsaken land. Toward a future they could no longer control. Toward freedom. The wastes were not empty. They were waiting. Aria flew until the phoenix fire flickered and died, until her wings dissolved into ember and ash, until her transformed body gave out and she plummeted from the sky. She hit frozen ground hard, rolling through snow that had already begun to melt from her residual heat. The world tilted, blurred, and went dark. When consciousness returned, it came with warmth. Real warmth, not the searing heat of her awakening, but the steady comfort of hearth fire. Aria's eyes opened to stone ancient, weathered walls that rose around her in what had once been a grand fortress. Firelight danced across carved pillars and through broken sections of roof, She could see stars blazing in a sky clearer than any she'd known in Ironwood territory. So the Phoenix finally returns. The voice was deep, measured, carrying the weight of someone who'd learned to command through action rather than volume. The old text said you would. I didn't think I'd live to see it. Aria pushed herself upright, every muscle protesting. A man stood by the fire, silhouetted against the flames. As he turned, the light revealed features carved by hardship, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in dark armor with heavy shoulder plates that bore the scratches of countless battles. His hair was long and black, tied back with leather cord, and a network of scars mapped his exposed forearms like a history written in pain. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as winter storms, intense and measuring, yet holding none of the judgment she'd grown accustomed to. An axe hung at his belt, but his hands were empty, open. Who are you? Aria's voice came out hoarse, raw from transformation and flight. Kale Stormwarden. Some call me the Shadow King, though I've never much cared for titles. He moved closer, each step deliberate, non-threatening. I rule the exiled and forsaken, those cast out by pacts who valued purity over survival. Welcome to what remains of the First Kingdom. Aria looked around with new eyes. These weren't random ruins. They were remnants of something magnificent, columns carved with spiraling script, floors inlaid with patterns of power, walls that had once held magic she could still feel humming beneath the surface. The spirit wars destroyed this place 5 centuries ago, Kale continued, following her gaze. The Phoenix bloodline fell with it, or so everyone believed. The Council of Nine made sure the truth was buried, that they're the ones who betrayed the First Kingdom, who wanted its power for themselves. He crouched beside her, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. We're not much to look at, those of us who survive here. But we're alive. 243 exiles who refused to die in the cold. Through the broken walls, Aria glimpsed movement. Figures tending fires, voices carrying on the wind. People. A community, thriving in a place meant to be death. Why help me? The question escaped before she could stop it. Kale's storm-gray eyes held hers. Because the pacts broke you for the same reason they broke us, fear of what we could become if we refuse to be less than we are. He stood, offering his hand. I won't ask you to bow. Won't ask you to hide your fire or pretend you're something smaller to make others comfortable. We don't ask you to be less. We ask you to be everything you are. The words struck something deep in her chest, a chord that had never been touched in 4 years with Theron. Choice. Acceptance. Space to be vast. Aria took his hand. His palm was calloused, warm, solid. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength. Welcome home, Phoenix. Kale's scarred face softened into something that might have been a smile. We've been waiting 500 years. For the first time since the Boundary Stones, Aria felt something other than rage or pain. She felt possibility. And when she looked into Kale's eyes, she saw not a man trying to possess her power, but a king who understood what it meant to be forged in exile. She didn't need revenge. She needed this, a place where the condemned could choose to live. The Boundary Stones still smoked 3 days later. Theron stood at the threshold, staring at the scorched earth where Aria had crossed into the wastes. The snow had melted in a perfect circle a mile wide, revealing black soil that steamed in the cold air. Her footprints remained, burned into the ground like brands, glowing faintly even now. Dead trees along the perimeter had bloomed impossibly, white flowers stark against blackened bark, a mockery of life where there should only be death. The severed bond ached in his chest like an amputated limb, phantom pain that throbbed with every heartbeat. He'd thought cutting the tie would bring relief, would silence the constant awareness of her presence. Instead, the absence was worse, a howling void where something precious had lived. "She'll return to destroy us all." Kasha's voice came from behind him, honeyed and urgent. She'd stayed close these past days, offering comfort he couldn't accept, speaking warnings he couldn't ignore. Phoenix fire is madness, Theron. The old texts say they burned entire kingdoms when wronged. He didn't turn. Couldn't bear to look at her when the ghost of Aria's gray eyes, gone gold in those final moments, haunted every thought. In the pack house, Beta Riker Ashford moved through Kasha's chambers with the methodical precision of a warrior who'd learned to trust his instincts over his orders. Something about the War Maiden's performance at the Exile had felt wrong, too practiced, too perfect. He searched quickly, aware he was violating protocol, until his fingers found the hidden compartment beneath her vanity. The journal was bound in red leather, pages filled with Kasha's elegant script. Riker's blood ran cold as he read. "The talisman is nearly complete. Aria's blood, stolen from the healing chambers, will be enough to forge the signature. Once I poison the air and plant the evidence, Theron will have no choice but to cast her out. The spiritless wretch has held him back for 4 years. Without her, he'll finally see me." Page after page of careful planning. The acquisition of forbidden materials. The poisoning of the child, measured doses to sicken but not kill, timed perfectly. The fabrication of evidence. Every detail of the frame laid bare in ink that might as well have been blood. Riker found Theron at the boundary and handed him the journal without a word. The Alpha Commander read in silence, his face draining of color beneath the fading war paint he hadn't bothered to wash off. His hands began to shake. The journal slipped from his fingers into the scorched earth. "No." The word was barely a whisper. Then louder, a roar of anguish that sent wolves scattering from the training grounds. No, he'd done this. He'd taken Kasha's lies as truth, had been so concerned with honor and bloodline purity that he'd condemned his own mate. The mate who'd healed his warriors, who'd asked for nothing but acknowledgement, who'd loved him in silence for 4 years while he treated her like shame-made flesh. And she'd been innocent. Theron turned on Kasha with the full weight of his alpha fury. She backed away, beautiful face crumbling into panic as warriors surrounded her. "Theron, please, I did it for us. Chain her." His voice was ice and iron. "Silver chains. She'll await the council's judgment for poisoning the air and bearing false witness." As they dragged Kasha away, her screams echoing across the grounds, Theron looked back toward the wastes. Somewhere in that frozen wilderness, the phoenix he'd thrown away was alive, transformed, beyond his reach. "Gather the army," he commanded, his voice hollow with purpose born of desperation. "I will bring her home or die trying." But even as he spoke the words, he knew the truth burning in those scorched footprints. Aria was already home. And it was a place he'd forfeited the right to enter. The wastes did not break spirits. They refined them. 1 week into her exile, Aria couldn't touch anything without burning it. Blankets ignited at her fingertips. Stone cracked beneath her palms. She stood in the center of the training yard, surrounded by scorch marks, fighting tears of frustration as blue-white flames licked across her skin with every surge of emotion. "You're fighting yourself." Kale's voice was calm, steady. He circled her slowly, keeping just outside the ring of heat. Fire is emotion. Master the emotion. Master the flame. "I don't know how," Aria admitted, her voice breaking. The flames pulsed brighter with her distress. "Yes, you do." He moved closer, close enough that the heat should have driven him back, but he stood firm. "You spent 4 years hiding what you felt. Now feel it all, but let it flow through you instead of consuming you." She closed her eyes, breathing deep. Fear, rage, grief. She stopped pushing the emotions down and instead let them rise, crest, and pass like waves. The flames around her hands flickered, steadied, then condensed into a controlled corona of blue fire. "There," Kale murmured. "That's it." The breakthrough came with an elderly exile named Garran, dying in the corner of a restored hall. Soul rot had taken him, the corruption that plagued those cut off from pack bonds too long, turning minds to madness and bodies to living decay. His skin had gone gray, eyes milky, and he thrashed against restraints while he screamed at demons only he could see. "Let me try," Aria whispered. She knelt beside him, placed her hands on his chest, and let the phoenix fire flow. Not the destructive heat of her awakening, but something gentler, a purifying flame that burned away shadow without consuming flesh. The darkness inside Garen's chest became visible, black tendrils of corruption that writhed as her fire touched them. Then they dissolved, turning to ash that floated away like snow. Garan gasped, his eyes clearing to sharp blue. "I can think," he breathed, wonder in his voice. "I can think clearly for the first time in years." The gathered exiles stared in silence. Then someone began to weep, a sound of hope reborn. Aria looked at her hands, at the gentle flames dancing there. Seraphil wasn't just destruction. She was purification. Rebirth. The power to burn away corruption and leave healing in its wake. "Now you understand," Kale said softly. "Why we've been waiting." Combat training began the next day. Kale moved like water made lethal, teaching her to combine phoenix fire with physical technique, how to feint with flame, strike with fire-wreathed fists, use her wings not just for flight, but as weapons that could shield and batter. She sparred with Lyra, a berserker woman who laughed while fighting, and Dax, a silent assassin whose blade never made a sound. 6 weeks passed in a blur of training, healing, and transformation. Aria learned the names of every exile, heard their stories, and one by one burned the soul rot from those afflicted. The settlement grew stronger, more organized. Warriors who'd been losing themselves to madness became sharp again, purposeful. And through it all, Kale was there. Teaching. Watching. His presence became the constant she measured her days against, the quiet moments by the fire when he'd tell stories of the First Kingdom, or sit in companionable silence while she practiced condensing her flames to pinpoint precision. One night, as they sat alone beneath stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, Kale spoke words that changed everything. "You don't heal just souls, Aria." His storm-gray eyes found hers across the firelight. "You healed mine. I've been a king of the broken for a decade, holding together people who were falling apart, and I was falling apart with them. Then you arrived, and for the first time since my exile, I remembered what it felt like to hope. Aria's breath caught. The space between them felt charged, electric. Kale. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the silver in his hair, the old scars that mapped his journey. I know you had a mate bond. I know the moon paired you with another. But bonds can be broken, and some connections are chosen, not fated. I choose this, Aria whispered, the truth of it resonating through her entire being. She reached up, cupping his scarred face in her hands. The phoenix fire danced between her fingers, but it didn't burn him. It warmed, illuminated, blessed. I choose you. Not fate, not bonds, choice. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the stolen moments with Theron, fraught with shame and secrecy. This was fierce and honest, a meeting of equals who'd both been forged in fire and emerged stronger. His hands tangled in her dark hair, and she pulled him closer, phoenix flames wreathing them both in light that spoke of new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Kale smiled, truly smiled, transforming his battle-hardened face into something beautiful. "Welcome home, Phoenix Queen," he murmured against her lips. And Aria knew, with absolute certainty, that she'd finally found where she belonged. The army came at dawn, banners black against the rising sun. 800 Ironwood warriors marched across the transformed wastes, their boots crunching on ground that had bloomed with impossible life. They moved in perfect formation, a tide of dark armor and wolf-born strength that had never known defeat. At their head rode Theron Ironheart, stripped of ceremony now, wearing only battle gear and the weight of his mistakes. From the ruins of the First Kingdom, 250 exiles emerged to meet them. They wore mismatched armor scavenged and repaired, carried weapons forged from salvage, but their eyes were clear, purified by phoenix fire, free of the soul rot that should have claimed them. They didn't look like victims anymore. They looked like survivors who'd learned to thrive in hell. Aria stood at their center, and she was magnificent. Black leather armor fitted to her frame, phoenix feather pauldrons at her shoulders that seemed to shimmer with inner light. Her dark hair was braided back for war, and her eyes blazed molten gold, Seraphel barely contained beneath human skin. Beside her, Kale stood in his dark plate armor, axe in hand, every inch the Shadow King. "Aria." Theron's voice carried across the distance, raw with desperation. He dismounted, took 3 steps forward. "I know the truth. Kasha confessed everything before the council. You were innocent. I was wrong about everything. My name is Seraphel." Her voice was ice, carrying none of the softness he'd once known. "Aria died on the boundary stones. You made certain of that. Please." He moved closer, hands outstretched, unarmed. "I will fight for you. I'll prove I'm worthy. Give me a chance to make this right. You had 4 years to claim me." Phoenix fire began to dance across her shoulders, blue-white flames that made the air shimmer. "For years while I healed your warriors, loved you in silence, asked for nothing but acknowledgement. You chose shame over truth, duty over heart. Now I choose freedom over chains, and you call it wrong." Theron's face hardened, alpha pride warring with regret. "Then I will take you back by force, for your own protection. The council wants to bind you, study you. Only under Ironwood's protection can you. Try." The single word hung in the air like a blade. Theron shifted, his wolf form erupting in an explosion of midnight fur and alpha power. He was massive, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, eyes burning amber with command that could break lesser spirits. He lunged with speed that defied physics, claws extended to grapple, not kill. Aria met him in the air. Wings of blue-white flame exploded from her shoulders, and she rose, spiraling upward before diving like a falling star. Fire streamed behind her in a comet's tail. Theron leaped, impossibly high, alpha strength launching him 20 feet up, and they collided midair with a thunderclap that shook the earth. They fought like legends made flesh. Theron was brutal efficiency, every move honed by decades of warfare. He landed blows that would have shattered stone, his alpha power pressing against her like a physical weight. But Aria flew, rained fire, used the sky itself as a weapon. Every time he closed the distance, she burned him back, phoenix flames scorching fur without consuming flesh yet. You can't win. Theron roared, catching her ankle mid-flight and slamming her into the frozen ground. The impact cratered the earth. Aria rose slowly, blood at the corner of her mouth, eyes blazing brighter. I already have. The transformation came like dawn breaking over mountains. Her human form dissolved into pure phoenix, wings spanning 30 feet, body wreathed in flames so intense they turned from blue to white to something beyond color. She was sun-made flesh, wrath-given form, and when she screamed, it was the sound of rebirth itself. Theron tried to retreat, but she was faster. One decisive dive, wings folded for maximum speed, and she struck him like divine judgment. Phoenix fire enveloped him completely, not the gentle purifying flames she used for healing, but the full fury of Seraphel unleashed. When the flames cleared, Theron lay on scorched earth, his armor melted to slag, his wolf form forced back to human by the sheer trauma. He was burned but alive, she'd held back just enough. He knelt, unable to rise, and for the first time in his life, Alpha Commander Theron Ironheart wept. The bond is dead, Seraphel said, her voice echoing across the battlefield. I am not yours. I never was. You made me prove that. She turned her burning gaze to the Ironwood army, 800 warriors frozen in horror. Go home. If you return, I will not be merciful. The command wasn't alpha power. It was something older, deeper, the authority of myth made real. The Ironwood army broke ranks and fled. Kale appeared at her side as Aria's phoenix form flickered back to human. She sagged, and he caught her, holding her upright while scorched earth still smoked around them. It's done, she whispered. Yes, Kale agreed, pressing his lips to her temple. It's done. And in the distance, Theron watched them, the woman he'd thrown away, standing with the king who'd chosen to treasure her, before his warriors dragged him away. Power does not ask permission, but it demands answers. 2 weeks after Theron's defeat, the envoy arrived. Not in a carriage pulled by horses, but on a floating platform of crystallized magic that hummed with ancient authority. It descended from the sky like a falling star, settling outside the restored fortress with barely a whisper. The figure who stepped off was draped in robes of pure white that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. High Arbiter Morvain was ancient beyond reckoning, skin like weathered parchment stretched over bones that had seen civilizations rise and fall. When he spoke, his voice was grinding stones, the sound of mountains breaking. Seraphel, Phoenix of the First Dawn, the Council of Nine summons you to the Spire of Accord. He extended a scroll sealed with 9 different sigils, each representing one of the Elder Powers. Your return disrupts the balance of the spirit realms. You will answer for this awakening. Aria took the scroll, feeling the weight of compulsion magic woven into the parchment. Not a request. A command dressed in formality. They fear what they can't control, Kale said after the envoy departed, his gray eyes dark with concern. The council destroyed the First Kingdom because it challenged their authority. They'll try to bind you, cage your power under laws they've spent 5 centuries perfecting. Aria stared at the scroll, 9 seals glowing faintly in her hands. If I don't go, they'll send armies. Not 800 warriors, but thousands. They'll burn this place and everyone in it to force my compliance. She looked up at him, resolve hardening in her golden eyes. Better to face them on ground they think is theirs. Then I'm coming with you. I know. The journey took 3 days across transformed landscape. The spire of Accord rose in the distance like a knife-cutting heaven, a tower of glass and silver that floated impossibly above a dead sea, tethered to nothing, existing in defiance of natural law. As they approached, Aria felt the weight of old magic pressing down, wards layered upon wards, designed to suppress, contain, control. The council chamber was a perfect circle. 9 thrones arranged with mathematical precision, each occupied by a figure of terrible power, ancient wolves, elder mages, beings who'd shaped the supernatural world for longer than most civilizations had existed. The air itself felt heavy, thick with judgment. And there, standing to the side as a witness, was Theron. His burns had healed, but something in his eyes remained broken. He didn't meet her gaze. Kasha knelt at the chamber's center, bound in silver chains that glowed with suppression runes. Her beautiful face was hollow, terrified. She'd been brought to serve as evidence, a pawn in whatever game the council was playing. High Arbiter Morvain took his seat at the highest throne. Let judgment begin. Aria stepped forward into the circle, Kayla's solid presence at her back, and prepared to face the powers that had buried her bloodline 500 years ago. This time, she would not burn alone. They built their power on contracts written in blood. She would write hers in fire. You stand accused, High Arbiter Morvain intoned, his ancient voice filling the chamber, of harboring forbidden phoenix fire, of healing the condemned who should remain broken, of disrupting the exile system that maintains order across all territories. He gestured to the other council members, their faces carved from stone and centuries. You are a realm asset that has awakened outside proper channels. Elder Cassandra, draped in crimson, leaned forward. The phoenix belongs to no one pack. It is a power meant to serve the greater balance, not the whims of exiles and outcasts. We offer you 3 choices, Morvain continued, producing a scroll that glowed with binding magic so potent the air around it warped. Submit to this contract, which will regulate your power and place you under Ironwood supervision. Return to proper pack structure where you can be guided, controlled, kept from destabilizing our carefully maintained order. Or, Aria's voice was steady, cold. Or be imprisoned in the void, where your fire will burn only yourself for eternity. Theron stepped forward, his voice rough with desperation. Please, Aria. Accept the binding. I'll protect you within the system. I've already sworn to the council that I'll claim you properly, publicly. We can rebuild the bond, and I'll stand between you and— No. The word cut through his plea like a blade. Aria stepped into the center of the circle, and her eyes blazed gold. I reject your authority. I reject your contracts written by those who betrayed the First Kingdom to seize its power. She turned slowly, meeting each elder's gaze. I reject your system that condemns the innocent, that casts out the different, that maintains order through fear and exile. Seize her, Morvain commanded. Bind her before she— 12 elite spirit binders materialized from the shadows, warriors wrapped in wards and carrying chains forged specifically to suppress supernatural power. They moved in perfect synchronization, centuries of training evident in every step. Aria closed her eyes and let go. The phoenix fire that erupted from her core wasn't the destructive inferno of battle. It was purification made manifest, blue-white flames that spread through the chamber like dawn breaking over a darkened world. The spire itself began to burn, glass walls igniting with fire that didn't shatter or melt but transformed, revealing the truth hidden beneath centuries of carefully maintained illusion. The binding contracts, physical scrolls mounted on the walls, written in blood and magic, caught fire. One by one they burned to ash, 500 years of control dissolving in moments. The spirit binders' chains melted before they could close the distance, their wards unraveling like thread pulled from cloth. Seraphel manifested fully within the chamber. Aria's human form remained, but the phoenix blazed around and through her, wings of pure flame spanning 40 feet, filling the space with light that forced the elders to shield their eyes. When she spoke, it was with the voice of ages, layered with every phoenix who had ever lived. I am not your weapon or your prisoner. I am not a tool to be regulated or an asset to be controlled. She rose, hovering in the center of the circle, wings beating with rhythm like a heartbeat. The purifying fire intensified, and suddenly the elders could see themselves, truly see themselves reflected in the flames. Their own corruption laid bare. The compromises made for power. The innocents condemned to maintain their authority. The First Kingdom betrayed because it refused to bow. Elder Cassandra screamed, covering her face. Others wept. Morvain sat frozen, confronted with 5 centuries of sins he'd buried beneath duty and law. Aria's gaze fell on Kasha, still bound at the chamber's edge. You wanted power so badly you poisoned a child and destroyed an innocent. Phoenix fire descended, gentle but absolute, and Kasha's spirit, the wolf she'd been so proud of, was burned away completely. Left truly spiritless, she collapsed, sobbing, finally feeling what she'd accused Aria of being. Then Aria turned to Theron. You wanted a mate who would submit, who would be grateful for scraps of acknowledgement, who would make herself small to fit your idea of acceptable. Her voice softened, but held no mercy. Find one who will. I am not her. She faced the council again, wings flaring wide. The wastes are now the Dawn Covenant. Kalestorm Warden is its king. I am its queen. We recognize no law but our own redemption through fire, rebirth through choice, sovereignty earned through survival. You cannot, Morvain tried to stand, but the purifying fire pressed him back into his throne. I already have. Aria's wings folded, and she descended to stand beside Kale, who'd watched the entire display with fierce pride. Acknowledge our sovereignty, or I will burn every binding contract, every false law, every corrupt accord you've built. Your choice. Silence. Then, slowly, Morvain bowed his head. The Dawn Covenant is recognized. Aria took Kale's hand, and together they walked toward the chamber wall. Phoenix fire opened a path through solid glass, and they stepped through into open air, leaving the council to sit in the ashes of their broken authority. Freedom tasted like smoke and victory. From the ashes of exile, a kingdom of the reborn. For months had transformed the wastes into something that defied its name. The ruins of the first kingdom had been rebuilt with stone forged in phoenix fire, walls that gleamed silver in moonlight and blazed gold at dawn, infused with magic that would stand for another 1,000 years. Streets wound between restored buildings where hundreds now lived, and gardens bloomed impossibly in soil that had been dead for centuries, fed by water from springs Aria's fire had coaxed back to life. They came weekly now, the exiled, the condemned, the broken. Those cast out by pacts that valued purity over compassion, perfection over healing. They arrived with nothing and were welcomed with everything. The Dawn Covenant asked only one thing: choose to live, choose to rebuild, choose to become more than what others said you were. Spring equinox arrived with clear skies and air that tasted of new beginnings. Thousands gathered in the great courtyard where the coronation platform had been raised, not just exiles, but delegations from pacts who'd seen the writing in the flames. The world was changing, and the wise chose to change with it. Aria stood before her people in a gown that appeared to be woven from fire itself, flame silk that shifted between blue and white and gold, seeming to burn without consuming, flowing around her like living light. A crown of white gold rested on her dark hair, phoenix feathers rising from it in a crest that caught the sun. Her gray eyes had gone permanently gold, Seraphel no longer dormant but integrated, awake. Beside her, Kale wore polished dark armor that gleamed like midnight water, a crown of shadow steel and sapphires stark against his long black hair. He looked every inch a king, scarred, fierce, and utterly devoted to the woman who'd brought light to his darkness. In the front row stood Riker, Theron's former beta, now captain of the Dawn Covenant Guard. 200 Ironwood warriors had followed him, unable to serve a broken alpha when a risen queen offered purpose. His eyes were clear, free of the conflict that had haunted him in the old pack. At the territory's edge, barely visible through the morning mist, a solitary figure stood watch. Theron, wrapped in a gray cloak, had taken up permanent residence at the border. He never approached, never spoke, simply guarded the boundaries of the kingdom he'd lost the right to enter, his penance self-imposed and eternal. Aria had seen him there, felt the ghost of what might have been, and felt only pity. No regret. That chapter had burned to ash. We were condemned to die, Aria's voice carried across the courtyard, amplified by magic and truth. Cast out into frozen darkness by those who feared what we could become. Instead, we chose to live. Kale stepped forward, his voice a thunderous compliment to hers. We are not rogues. We are not exiles. We are the reborn, forged in fire, tempered by survival, stronger for what tried to break us. They spoke their vows then, not just to each other, but to every person gathered. To protect the condemned. To offer sanctuary to the broken. To build a kingdom where healing was honored above warfare, where redemption was earned through choice, not granted by mercy. Aria's wings erupted in a cascade of blue-white flame, spreading wide above the assembled thousands. Phoenix fire rained down like gentle snow, and where it touched, old wounds healed, soul rot burned away, and hope, that most dangerous and beautiful thing, took root. She threw back her head and howled, and it was Seraphel's call, the sound of dawn breaking over mountains, of ice melting into spring, of death transforming into rebirth. Thousands of voices answered, wolves and humans and all those in between, a chorus that shook the earth and reached the heavens. She'd been sentenced to die in darkness, condemned by those who couldn't see beyond their own fear. Instead, she'd risen with the dawn, built a kingdom from ruins, and proven that true power wasn't claiming what was taken, it was forging what was never offered. The Phoenix Queen smiled, took her Shadow King's hand, and together they stepped forward into the future they'd chosen to create. The condemned had become the redeemers, and the dawn had only just begun.